October 15, 2023 began like any other morning. The coffee maker clicked on at 5:45 a.m. The kitchen window fogged slightly from the steam. I stood at the sink looking at the backyard Raymond had once called our retirement plan, though he'd said it half-jokingly, dirt under his fingernails, sunburn on his neck. By 7:03 a.m., my daughter-in-law was standing across from me at my grandmother's antique vanity, the one I'd moved downstairs years ago because the light was better there. "Constance," she said carefully, as if speaking to someone fragile, "it's time you found your own place, somewhere more appropriate for someone your age." I remember the hum of the refrigerator, the faint smell of celery juice. The way the floor felt cold beneath my slippers. I didn't cry, I didn't raise my voice. I said, "Okay," and then I went downstairs and poured myself another cup of coffee. That was the moment something ended, quietly, without drama. Without witnesses. My name is Constance Miller. I'm 67 years old. I taught second grade for 33 years. I know how to spot the beginning of a behavior pattern long before it becomes a problem. I just never expected to see one forming in my own kitchen. Raymond died in March of 2020, pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to burial. The house had felt hollow after that, too quiet. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like memory. When Brandon asked if he and Ashley could move in just temporarily, I said yes before he finished the sentence. The silence had been heavy, and I thought company might soften it. At first it did, then things shifted. Small adjustments. My sewing room became her filming space. My photographs came down because they were visually busy. Dinner times moved to accommodate her schedule. My piano students were asked to reschedule because content creation requires quiet. None of it felt catastrophic in isolation. That's how displacement works. It arrives in polite sentences. "You don't mind, do you? It's just temporary. It makes more sense this way." I began waking earlier to stay out of the kitchen during her routines. I folded myself into smaller shapes. I told myself it was generosity. Flexibility, love, but love without boundaries can look a lot like erasure. The finances were always vague. Brandon handled the mortgage paperwork after Raymond passed. I signed documents in a fog of grief, trusting my son to do what was sensible. When Ashley spoke about senior living communities, she did it gently, almost sweetly. "There are lovely places nearby," she said, "activities. People your age, no stairs to worry about." People your age. I still ran 3 miles every other morning. I maintained a garden large enough to feed half the block. I could climb a ladder and clean gutters without assistance. But in their version of reality, I was already fragile. After that conversation, I went upstairs and sat on my bed for a long time. The house felt different, like I was already visiting. Raymond had left a lockbox in the closet. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. He'd told me the combination was our wedding date. Inside was a letter and paperwork I had never seen, life insurance, investments, rental properties I hadn't known existed. A pension I'd assumed had dissolved into medical debt. I sat on the edge of the bed reading those numbers over and over, not because they thrilled me, but because they confused me. Raymond had built something quietly, methodically. While I thought we were barely managing, and then a colder realization surfaced. The pension had been depositing into an account I had never accessed, an account with my name on it, and Brandon's. I went to the bank the next morning. The fluorescent lighting made everything feel exposed. The signature on the joint account wasn't mine. It looked like mine, close enough to pass at a glance. But it wasn't. I didn't scream, I didn't accuse, I asked for copies. Then I met with a lawyer. The word fraud sat heavily in the room between us. "Financial elder abuse," he said gently. Hearing it out loud made my hands tremble, not because of the money, because of the intention behind it. This hadn't been carelessness, it had been planning. I went home that afternoon and watched Ashley measure the living room wall for new shelving. I watched my son scroll through his phone at the kitchen table. And I understood something clearly for the first time. They had already moved on from me. I was simply still occupying the space. The decision to leave didn't come from anger, it came from clarity. I began meeting quietly with financial advisors. I reclaimed accounts. I redirected deposits. I documented everything. At night, I lay awake not from rage but from grief. How had we arrived here? When had my son begun seeing me as an obstacle instead of a person? I replayed small memories. The first time Ashley corrected me in my own kitchen. The first time Brandon avoided eye contact during a disagreement. The way he deferred to her with a subtle nod before speaking. It hadn't happened overnight. It never does. When I told them I would be moving, I didn't mention Monaco immediately. I simply said I had options. Ashley looked relieved. Brandon looked confused. I packed slowly, not dramatically, not in secret, just deliberately. The house sold within weeks. I didn't choose buyers based on the highest offer alone. I chose the couple who walked through the rooms like they were listening to the walls. The closing was quiet. A handshake. A cashier's check, no fireworks. When I left Portland, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light and sad. Grief can exist alongside relief. Monaco was not a fantasy escape. It was a practical decision, a place where my pension and investments could sustain a modest but independent life. The first weeks were lonely. I struggled with French. I missed Dorothy's laugh next door. I missed the smell of rain on Oregon pavement. But slowly, routines formed. Morning walks along the harbor, piano lessons for neighborhood children. Saturday pétanque games with retirees who argued passionately over centimeters. I wasn't reinventing myself. I was returning to myself. 3 months after I arrived, Brandon called. His voice sounded thinner. Ashley had left. Financial strain, expectations unmet. He didn't ask for money, he asked for forgiveness. I didn't offer it immediately. Forgiveness is not a reflex, it's a process. Over months, we spoke carefully, slowly. Sometimes with long silences between words. He began therapy. He admitted he had confused security with entitlement, that he had assumed I would always absorb the consequences of his decisions. I listened. Healing doesn't look dramatic. It looks like awkward conversations, like admitting fault, like rebuilding trust one small promise at a time. When he visited Monaco for the first time, he stood on my terrace and said nothing for nearly a minute. "I didn't see you," he finally said. "I only saw what you could give." That hurt more than the eviction suggestion ever had, but it was honest. We walked the coastal path together. We talked about Raymond, about fear. About the ways children sometimes forget their parents are human. The relationship didn't snap back into place. It stretched, tested, adjusted. A year later, my life is quieter than the dramatic version people imagine. I wake early. I make coffee, I practice French, I teach piano twice a week. I have dinner with friends who know me simply as Constance. Brandon visits quarterly. We talk like adults now. Sometimes we disagree, sometimes we laugh. Trust is rebuilding slowly. I own my apartment outright. I manage my finances personally. I have systems in place that require no one else's oversight. The money Raymond left wasn't a fairy tale rescue, it was a foundation. The real transformation wasn't geographic, it was internal. I stopped being the convenient woman. I stopped mistaking self-erasure for love. The morning Ashley told me to find my own place, she meant a retirement facility. What I found instead was autonomy, not because I moved across the ocean, but because I stopped allowing other people to define where I belonged. Now, when I stand on my terrace at sunrise, I don't feel victorious, I feel steady. And that is enough.